Welcome to Sexually Charged Radio. I'm Ruthie.
And I'm Thomas.
Thomas, I always ask why you do this show and why you're interested in this, but maybe I'm going to ask you something different today. If you could create your fantasy pizza, what would it be?
Oh, God.
Totally unprepared for this question.
No, there was no preparation.
No, and I mixed the word fantasy with pizza, so go ahead.
My fantasy pizza would probably have green olives.
Yeah. It's a bold move.
I know. I start off small, get a little bigger with some pineapple.
Quite flavorful. Yeah. Olives and pineapple. Okay.
Oh, yeah. You need the pineapple for the afterward flavor.
Okay.
And
it's a chaser.
Yeah. And I think, you want a variety of meats kind of
I know
put on
you
there.
do.
And some mushrooms.
All right. So now ask me a question I'm completely not anticipating. It can't be the fantasy pizza one because now I'm ready for it.
No, I would come up with a little more creative.
Oh, burn. Okay, go ahead.
So, if you had to only see one color for the rest of your life, it could be shades of that color, but only slightly, what color would it be?
Green.
And why?
Green is the most soothing to the eyes. It also can be helpful with depression. And I find it to be the most relaxing color to look at. It's not actually my favorite color. My favorite color is kind of a bluey purple. But I do find green to put me in a happier, healthier kind of mindset. So I think that's the one I would miss the most. And thus that's the one I would go ahead and see. Although it would probably stop being helpful very quickly.
Well, because then I'd start to be worried, like you're looking at water and it's green water. And then do you still go swimming?
Green popcorn. That would just be, I don't know. I'm sticking with it anyway.
Okay.
All right. So that is a good question. And speaking of good questions, we have some questions here. Our questions come from students for the most part, and they are emailed to asksc for sexually charged at uogwelf.ca. And the folks at Student Wellness, who also do our wonderful editing and all this hard work they put into this collaboration, receive those questions and forward some of them on to us. Although those questions also come from dorm presentations and sometimes questions we bring in as well, or people stop us on the sidewalk or wherever we are and ask us to bring a question into the show too. Do you want to read our first question for today, Thomas?
Oh, I would be absolutely enticed with that idea.
All right. Like an olive pizza.
Now see, I'm getting hungry.
I know, me too.
My friend and I are interested in each other, but they're in a long-term monogamous relationship. What can I do?
All right. So this person wants to date somebody. They want to date each other, but one of them is monogamous long-term. And what can I do is a very proactive sounding question. Not like, what do I do? How do I get over it? But what can I do? Sounds like they really want to get in there. Yeah. They want to get a piece of that.
Well, what are your thoughts, Ruthie?
Oh my goodness. Don't be a jerk. That's my first thought. Really, I'm just going to put it out there. So,
what does that mean? What does that?
That's a good question. For folks who are committed to monogamy, don't spend a lot of time teasing yourself with outside options, or don't spend a lot of time stringing along your current relationship when you feel like your foot is out the door already and you're not committed to the time and energy that's necessary to keep putting into that relationship. Relationships don't just happen. They don't just sustain themselves. They take a lot of energy and a lot of dedication, whether it's monogamous or non-monogamous. Different kinds of energy maybe for the two sometimes the same. But if you are not willing to invest that in that relationship anymore, then don't string it along. Or if it seems like your partner has given up on it, then perhaps you are being strung along. Likewise, if you are sure you want to stay in that monogamous situation, then, don't string along the other person. You can acknowledge that there's mutual interest, but don't play with fire if you're trying to lock it down. What are your first thoughts?
Yeah. Gosh. I mean, it's a tough situation because, emotions are in play here. And, for the letter writer, because they're the one not in a relationship, I would start off by saying, know what you're looking for. Try to understand your perspective, what you're hoping to get out of the situation, before necessarily allowing the other person to continue either stringing you on or them making a decision. They can make whatever decision they want about their current long-term relationship, but you need to know what you're ready for. Because if this person breaks up with their long-term relationship and then just wants to be single because, that's what they're looking for first before they get into a relationship, you need to be okay with that. That's their choice. But if they're getting out of that long-term relationship and want to jump into another long-term relationship, and you're just ready for, casual dating, so you need to know what you want so that you can then communicate that to the other person.
And know whether what they're communicating to you is what you want to accept, right?
Exactly.
So I'm going to overread into this a little bit around the don't be a jerk thing. I'm going to say some more that maybe this asker is not even this kind of person at all, but I think this is a common situation. Just because you're attracted to somebody and you want them, and even they might be attracted to you back, but they're not available, that does not give you a right to them or to interfere in the nature of their relationship. So oftentimes I hear from people, well, but I'm in love, but I really want this person, but we're meant to be. You know what? Quit being a jerk. Like, if that person has said, yeah, I like you too, but I am in this monogamous situation, then what can I do? You can say, thanks. I respect that we are attracted to each other, but you have said no. And so I'm not going to engage in some sort of romanticized weird stalking or coercion. It's all like, it's beautiful in Hollywood, right? You go get the girl or you go get the guy, but that's not respectful, consensual behavior. And if the other person wants to be like won that way, then I'm quite concerned about everything then from every direction. So that falls under, maybe there wouldn't be a jerk like that, but I hear about that. So, I'm going to pursue him. I'm going to get that person. Well, screw you, like lay off. They get to make their own decisions about relationships.
Yeah. And I think in that situation, you have to realize that you are the external party. That has been made clear by virtue of that person being in a long-term relationship. However, if they are communicating, I'm wanting to end this relationship that I'm in, I'm interested in you, and this is my intention, that would be a different situation.
But think carefully about that, because somebody's saying, oh yeah, honey, I'm going to break up with him for you. And my grandma might say, you lose him the way you get him. So there's also, that's not universal advice, but it is something to consider for sure.
Yeah. And I think there is complexity in here. And you're friends too. And so what kind of layers of relationships are you willing to engage in? So, if you have these feelings and they have these feelings, and suddenly, there's an opportunity to move forward with that, are you going to put your friendship relationship at some risk as well? And how that's happened because you've both put it out there, but that person decides to stay in the relationship. There's lots of complex outcomes that could come about here, and you need to know what are you willing to gain and what are you willing to lose, because both things are possible.
I have a true, this wasn't my question, I promise, but I have a true story about this. Can I share it?
If you're open to it.
Yeah, I'm open to everything, as our listeners know. So I was hanging out with a friend of mine. This is a number of years ago. And we were both like doing some stuff in my kitchen, and we were cooking or packing or probably cleaning. And I was interested in dating her, and available to date her. And at this, I'm poly, but also was decided that I had time and energy and resources in my current relationship, so I could date someone else. And, but I knew that she was in a long-term monogamous relationship. And, at one point we were packing and she got giggly and told me that she found me attractive. And I said, I think you're really attractive too. I would date you in a split second if your relationship were not such that would be inappropriate. And we just kind of looked at each other and I was like, so are you going to keep dating that other person? She said, yeah, I really like this person. I'm going to stay in this monogamous relationship. And then I said, well, that was probably the most mature conversation I've ever had with somebody about mutual attraction that's not going to go anywhere. And so then we just high-fived each other. And I was like, what great friends are we that we can say this to each other, recognize an appropriate boundary, and then just keep cleaning the kitchen and continue to be good friends. So we high-fived and talked about how awesome we both were. And then we just continued to do the kitchen thing. So when this question is, what can I do? I guess that's kind of my answer, but that's just based on my own personal experience.
Well, personal experience is why people listen to the show.
I hope so. And your delightful voice, Thomas.
Well, of course.
And my lack of boundaries.
But so I think there's, getting back to what can I do? So we've talked about knowing yourself. We've talked about having conversations and being respectful and being mature.
Watching your entitlement.
Yeah, watching your entitlement, not being that jerk who just barges in with the radio over their head and expect that to,
or stringing someone else along. I know, right? That's so romanticized. It's in the movies all the time. I was thinking of, you're doing such a great summary, but I'm just going to ruin it here by busting in. I was thinking of one of my favorite movies, Love Actually.
Oh, yeah.
And where, the guy is the crush on the girl, but she marries his best friend. And then she kind of figures out about the crush. And then he's kind of he's very bad at communication. But it's so romantic. And then he shows up later with these cards where he's talking about how he's like so in love with her and he's always going to be in love with her. And he's like, that's enough. And then he decides not to try to interfere anymore. But, that was just a real jerk move on his part, even though I'm like, oh, every time it happens, like that was just not an okay thing to do. You don't get to go mess things up like that.
Yeah, we probably should have put a spoiler alert out there.
I didn't spoil the whole movie. Also, it's over 10 years old, so I think we're okay.
Okay. But yeah, I think those sorts of situations, Hollywood portrays them so often. And, it does. Like, everyone gets a little teary-eyed. Okay, I get teary-eyed in those moments.
Love it.
But then when you think about, well, what about the other person? And I'm not saying that that's necessarily your responsibility as the third party to think about that other person, but, if we're trying to create a more decent human race in the process, maybe it's not such a bad thing to consider how you would want to be treated if that was you as...
Be kind. Just be kind. It's easier said than done.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry I interrupted your summary. Were there any other parts?
Well, no, I lost my train of thought, but, so I guess the one other part I'd maybe like to get your input on with here in the situation is in relation to what if this letter writer was the person who was in the long-term relationship? They're interested in somebody outside, but they're stuck in this monogamous relationship. What would your recommendation be?
Well, kind of what's the goal? Do you want to try and open the relationship? Because, I think of things like the Hunger Games and I'm like, just date them both. I think at some point or maybe it was Twilight, one of those, they were like, that was even a possibility or something. So anyway, my soapbox. But, so you could look to different resources to learn about that and see if you're open to that idea. I really like Opening Up by Tristan Taormino. It's a fabulous book to learn about the stuff and all the different types of open relationships there can be and kind of things to consider. Are you at a point in the relationship where it's just not a good time? Like perhaps you deal with seasonal depression or you're just not in good decision-making place. Sometimes the desire to have a different relationship can inform us about what's missing in our current relationship. This person, pays lots of attention to me, or they, there's a lot of sexual chemistry and I miss having that in my other relationship, or they're just really nice to me, or they do things that interest me, whatever the case may be. And that might be good information to bring back to your current partner, whether you tell them about the other interest or not, that you're feeling something lacking. So maybe you're in a place where you're not at your best decision-making or something needs to be kind of upgraded in your current relationship. Or, this may also be that you're ready to move on. And so to really take good stock of yourself. Now, if you're ready to move on, please, I hope, let it not be because of the new person, but because you're ready to move on and a new person happens to be there. I think that's an important differentiation.
Oh, I love that. I think that's so important. And that's a difficult thing to disentangle.
Oh, yeah.
But if you move on for someone else, that's putting a lot of pressure on that other person. It's putting a lot of pressure on that relationship. And,
it's okay to move on to someone else, but the difference between that and moving on for someone else. Because a lot of people really struggle with leaving a relationship unless they feel like they have another relationship to move into. And that's actually a whole area of research and family development theory and things like that. But again, acknowledge that it's not just because the new person is great. It's because it's time to end the older relationship. And if you can acknowledge that, then spend some good time thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, that was quite an interesting take on that question. And that's a question that you just heard on Sexually Charged Radio here at 93.3 FM CFRU. You can listen to Sexually Charged Radio at cfru.ca, or you can search us on YouTube and just search Sexually Charged Radio. And if you have a question that you'd like us to talk about and explore, you can email us at asksc@uoguelph.ca, and the great team over at Wellness will look at your questions and do some research and hopefully get back to us so we can talk about it going forward.
Thomas, I want to ask you about penises and oral sex. Are you ready?
Oh, I was always ready for that question.
I know, right? Here we go. Question from a student. Circumcised versus uncircumcised. Well, this isn't really a question. This is more just kind of a blurting of statements, but I think that they're still very important. Circumcised versus uncircumcised. Oral sex. What's the difference? How do you pleasure the latter? It's almost, it's not a haiku, but I feel like with a little work it could be.
I mean, it also kind of sounds like maybe a movie title, like Circumcised versus Uncircumcised.
Yeah.
You know.
But I want to know your thoughts. Okay, so just in case people don't know the difference, what is circumcised and uncircumcised, Thomas?
So, uncircumcised penis is a penis that an individual cisgender male may be born with a penis that has a foreskin upon it.
If you were born with a penis, it probably had a foreskin.
Yes.
Like almost always. I would say always, but there's always a little variety out there.
Yeah, I always try to... I'm still learning a lot in terms of terminology around...
Did I mess that up?
No, you were right, but I'm just... my learning process is I'm trying to be as inclusive as possible in talking about penises.
I just don't want to confuse anybody. The great ongoing struggle between political correctness, which is not a put down. It's actually just giving a crap about other people and making sure that people can understand what you're saying.
The struggles are real.
Right.
And then for either religious purposes or like personal preferences or medical reasons, individuals either at birth or later in their life may be circumcised or choose to be circumcised, which is the removal of the foreskin on the penis.
Right. So penises oftentimes that you run into are either circumcised or uncircumcised. There's different kind of slang words for this, like cut or uncut. So if you're cut, then the foreskin's been removed. So that would be circumcised.
Hooded, unhooded.
Right. Sometimes you hear the word intact for uncircumcised, which I think is not always the most polite term. So we try not to use that. So, but just putting that out there, that might be a word people hear.
Yeah, so I think, does that clarify maybe a bit around circumcision?
I think so. So there can be visual differences, and penises always look different anyway from each other. But not all circumcised penises or all uncircumcised penises look the same, and there's debate about like what's more sensitive or what's healthier, and what's more attractive is really, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So there's those thoughts as well.
Yeah, there was a little story.
Can't wait.
So a friend, they were having a baby boy, and they were talking to the doctor beforehand, and the doctor said, okay, well, do you want him circumcised or uncircumcised? And they said, okay, well, like, circumcised. And this isn't a joke. I feel like I was starting off as a joke.
I'm ready.
And the doctor said, okay, well, like, you could have it done this way, or this way. Depending on what doctor does it, it'll look different. And these friends were saying, oh, so, when the time comes that, their son is showering in gym class, they'll be able to look around and say, oh, this was by this doctor and this doctor and this doctor. And so there can be very visual differences. And the process of circumcision can be very different or can look very different depending on what that process was and at what point. Because not everyone is circumcised at birth who does eventually become circumcised. Sometimes that happens later on in life.
Yep. Yeah. So the next phrase that's written on this is oral sex. So we have talked about what's the difference in general, but oral sex, what's the difference? And then how do you pleasure the latter, which is uncircumcised? So what do we think? What are the oral sex differences with circumcised versus uncircumcised? Well, there's more there on an uncircumcised penis, right? So the physical structures are a bit different. There's this the skin that kind of wraps around the head of the penis, end of the penis, and is attached. And sometimes it can slide more or slide less, kind of depending on how tight it is, or also kind of where it's attached, because there's a little attachment point that sometimes people get surgically removed or some damage happens there, something like that. So it functions differently between the two. How might that impact oral sex, Thomas?
So one commonly talked about impact is that uncircumcised penises have greater sensitivity to stimulation. And that's because being protected by the foreskin, the nerves haven't been dulled is the wrong word.
Well, the skin gets a little tougher to protect itself when it doesn't have a covering.
Yes. Thank you. Always so good at just re-clarifying my points. And so with a circumcised penis, that sometimes there is a different level of sensitivity that could exist there. In terms of other differences in relation to oral sex, just the sensation for the individual giving oral sex can be very different. As you said, there's more there, but just even the style and the attention that you need to provide because of that sensitivity is that certain areas of the penis can become overstimulated much quicker on a uncircumcised penis. I have to keep looking down at the notes so I can make
using the right words. I was at this phenomenal workshop a while ago on giving hand jobs. That's what it was on. And it was run by A Woman's Touch, which is a great women in queer positive, although anybody can shop there, sex toy store over in Toronto. And it was like an all-day workshop, and it was like a hands-on thing, and everybody was in like their own little separate rooms. It was actually hands-on. And there were little separate rooms and stuff, and it was just a phenomenal workshop. And there was a lot of attention paid to the differences in hand stimulation with circumcised versus uncircumcised. And I'd never been to a workshop that dealt with it in that much detail. It was really nice. So it was a lot of good knowledge that could be applied to oral sex as well. So with an uncircumcised penis, because the questioner is really kind of asking for focus on that. And this is assuming that you're not using a condom for oral sex. And if you are, you pull the foreskin down as far as is comfortable, and then just roll the condom over and just proceed as usual with anybody else in a condom. So if there's not a barrier involved, then you have different areas to use your tongue and your lips, and also your hands if you want to, outside and inside the foreskin, if it's comfortable for the foreskin owner to have that area touched.
Everyone will have their own preferences, and it's very important because of some of the sensitivity aspects that there is communication going on, and that you're aware of your partner's satisfaction or enjoyment of the situation, because for some individuals that sensation can be overstimulating and create discomfort as a result of that. And so just being aware that sometimes it takes a bit of exploring in terms of exploring the penis and getting to know it before just letting loose and letting passion take over. And I mean, not that you can't be passionate while exploring, but it's a bit of a different.
Yeah, a little more mindful. And can be a lot of stigma about having a penis that looks different from the other penises you've seen. Whether most of the penises you've seen are circumcised or uncircumcised, if you're not in the same camp, then you could feel a lot of stigma about that. Or that are different from what your partners have seen, and perhaps your partners have not necessarily been kind in expressing their surprise or whatever the case may be. So, I've certainly heard of many situations of people who were uncircumcised, but were used to seeing, people at the gym or whatever who were circumcised, and they hadn't even done much exploration of their own with their foreskin to see what they liked and didn't like because of this stigma around it. They didn't want to look at it. They felt weird about it. Maybe someday they would become circumcised. But, perhaps then if you encounter a partner who does feel a sense of stigma about their bits, you can invite them into some exploration to whatever level is comfortable with both of you. People don't necessarily know their own body that well yet, especially if they're stigma or they don't have a lot of experience. I want to go ahead and just bring up maybe the thing that we haven't talked about, which is speaking of stigma, which is the tremendous kind of mean cultural humor about smegma, which is so there's this kind of cultural humor or joke that under foreskin, just like body oils and dirt and stuff will build up, and it might have like a smell to it or a texture or an appearance to it. So when I talk about this as humor, I'm not saying that it can't happen. It can happen, but it can also happen in lots of places of the body, and we don't get all worked up about it. So some people get it in their belly buttons or behind their ears or whatever the case may be. And it's nothing that your normal showering routine can't take care of for you. And, just like your belly button may get particularly sweaty or whatever if you've just been to the gym or, running for class, whatever the case may be. And so you would wash your belly button. Same kind of deal. Absolutely. So, people make cruel jokes, especially about sex and anatomy things. So there's a lot of cruel jokes out there about giving oral sex without a barrier to folks who are uncircumcised. And you know what? I'm sure there's folks out there who just don't have good shower hygiene for their whole body, head to toe. Maybe they didn't even learn necessarily how to shower their penis appropriately. That's also possible. Or, you know, there may be considerations around how often people shower because of water availability or other types of reasons like that. So there's other things to consider. But generally speaking, it's the belly button analogy I keep giving. So I want to go ahead and put that out there, but then also talk about that, you know, not being a big issue. And for many people, regardless of circumcision or anything else like that, they like to take a shower before they have sex anyway. And that can also be a sexy thing to do together.
Absolutely. And I think I'm really glad you brought it up because it doesn't get talked about. And I think we have to accept the fact that our bodies sweat and our bodies produce oils and we get dirty. And yes, that can be a bit of a turn off in the moment for certain people. But
although for some people, it's also a turn on, just putting it out there. I mean, a lot of people like that after gym smell.
And I think it's about having an understanding of, you know, sometimes that happens. Sometimes people, you know, burp or fart during sex. It happens.
It sounds worst feels best is kind of like a refrain for some folks that I know. Yeah.
Okay. Wasn't expecting that.
Bodies make funny sounds when they're together. It just happens, right?
And if you can't have a bit of a smile or a laugh about sex, I'm not going to say you shouldn't be having it, but, you know, I think you're missing out on an opportunity to just enjoy things in a different way. And, you know I laugh and I just don't take myself too seriously.
And well, you know, there's a lot less fear about messing it up or doing it wrong or not looking right or sounding right or feeling right if you are with somebody, whether it's casual or not, where you can have a sense of humor about it and just recognize that, again, like I said, maybe sounds worse, feels best is this little extreme, but bodies are funny when they get together with themselves or with other bodies. And that includes sounds and smells and, you know, bodies are just funny.
Tastes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we are pretty much out of time. Do you have any last minute thoughts for I just love the way this is written. Circumcised versus uncircumcised. Oral sex. What's the difference? How do you pleasure the latter? Any final thoughts for that?
So my main point that I want to hit home is that for pleasure, it's a two-way street. So it is about, yes, finding pleasure for the circumcised and uncircumcised penis, who's receiving it, but it's also about pleasure for the person giving it. And so I really appreciate that you're asking about how to pleasure the penis, but also think about how in that act you can also feel pleasure.
And I'm still just thinking about the importance of humor in the moment, and that bodies are just bodies and bodies are funny. So exploring together, but in that mindful, respectful way of not wanting to accidentally or purposefully be stigmatizing to someone. And maybe you will have to ask them to show you, or you'll have to discover things together. And that can be part of the fun of exploring each other's bodies.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me on Sexually Charged Radio, Thomas. I'm glad that you're here.
I'm glad you're here too, Ruthie.
Yay. You can listen to us at 93.3 FM if you're in the Guelph area, which is CFRU. You can stream it from cfru.ca from anywhere in the world. And you can also YouTube search Sexually Charged Radio to find episodes there online. And tell us about sending in questions.
You can send in questions to AskSC, that's the initials for Sexually Charged, AskSC at uoguelph.ca, and hopefully your question will make it to the air.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll see you at a future episode.
Bye for now.